guys. Welcome to another podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. Before we get into it though, guys, if you're new to the channel, please considering liking, subscribing and sharing this information if you find it helpful. It really does help the channel out. So today's guest is Jerry Marzinsky. Hi there, Jerry. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today.
Really excited to have you on. It really ties nicely with some of the stuff that I've been talking about over the recent months in terms of mental health and entities and how they're attached. Just to let our listeners know, Jerry is a licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with schizophrenic and other psychiatric patients in state hospitals, prisons and emergency rooms. Worked in the largest mental health unit in Central State Hospital. Also held other positions in Arizona State Prison and Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital, surrounding psychology, psychiatry, and substance abuse. So it's quite a CV there, Jerry. If anyone's an expert on this subject, I assume it would be you. You've had a lot of experience working with these patients. So where did it all start for you?
Well, it started, where it really started was when I was a kid. And I learned not to trust authority. It was just one incident after another, where you know, just something happened where I'm like, I can't trust it. I can't trust this one. I can't trust this one. And the last one left was my dad had kind of programmed me to believe that college professors were like gods. So, you know, end up in Temple University and going through the psychology program there. And then I went 2-3 years, and then I ran into this most egotistical professor I've ever seen. It wasn't even in my major. You know, it was an elective. And this guy really did something really nasty to the entire class. I mean, he lied to us and said, okay, he put all these things on the board. I mean, it was an ancient history class. And the book was like, you know, foot thick. And this wasn't even, it was an elective. He said, okay, this stuff is not going to be on the test. Turned out he put about 2/3 of it on the test.
Oh, wow.
You know, and the entire class got slammed. And I was like, oh, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. And, you know, there went that one. So past that point, you know, here's all this stuff coming out. And what I hated about undergraduate psychology is you didn't have access to the clinical population. The only thing you could really check out with what they were saying was in experimental psychology, where you could go in there and you could play with the rats and you could run these different things and you could see what was happening. But everything else you had to take their word for it. And I didn't like that, since, you know, especially after that one professor. So you look in the back of the psych book and you go, where'd they get this information? And it was like, this guy got it from this guy, got it from this guy, who got it from this guy, and got it from this guy. And very few of them were out on the front lines in clinics. You know, they were academics. And, you know, I'm like, shoot, you know, it's like, you said you were scuba diving. I remember one time I was down on the bottom, and here's this little colony of these little fish that had these little mounds, and they stick their heads out of the mounds. And then when one left to steal a rock from another to add to his mound, another fish came and stole his little rock. And I'm fascinated with this. I didn't even know why. The only ones that were bringing in new rocks were the ones on the edge of the colony.
Yeah.
They were bringing in new material, and the rest were just stealing it from each other. And I saw that, and I went, that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
You know, they're just, you know, they're just taking this, and it's like, you know, intellectual incest. And very few of them were clinicians, you know, that had spent any significant time out on the front lines in mental health. I mean, they might have been student counselors, but most of them were academics. So it's like, hey.
Isn't it scary though, how, you know, like you said, people don't question it. They get a textbook and they just learn whatever's in this textbook and they treat it as gospel. And so this Chinese whispers gets passed along and it's, you know, propagated as truth. And everyone's saying the same thing. As you say, no one's bringing new rocks to the party. So you had some deep-rooted suspicions straight off the bat then, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, and then there were a couple of them, they're still in undergraduate psych, where we were assigned this one research article to read, where this psychologist who said that if two crazy people were to encounter each other with the same delusion, so if both of them believed they were Genghis Khan, one of them would have to give way and change that delusion to something else. And I'm like, why would they have to do that? They're both crazy. What would foster such a thing? You know, and I'm kind of looking through this article to see why this guy said this, and he just said it. I mean, it was just, so fast forward probably 15, 20 years, I was working in Central State Hospital. It was the biggest psychiatric institution in the world at the time I got there.
On that video you sent me the link. This place is huge. For listeners out there, just Google the image. It's a massive place.
Yeah, it was like 2,000 acres and over 200 buildings. There were probably over 10,000 psychiatric patients there when I first arrived. So I was assigned to one of the psychiatric wards, and you know, one day I was making my rounds on the second floor. It's a big old brick building, like 100 years old, and I'm looking for new patients and patients who were rehabilitatable, somebody we could send over to the local rehab center and perhaps get a job. And,
can I just interrupt there? What is classed as rehabilitation according to that system?
Well, what we had was a vocational rehabilitation system on the grounds of the state hospital. Mm-hmm. So what our job was to find the highest functioning psychiatric patients that we could find, that we thought we could train and give a vocational skill to, and then get them out of the hospital with a job.
Okay.
So we were constantly searching for those high functioning patients that we could perhaps get out of there. I was making the rounds one day, and here's this new psychiatric patient walking back and forth through this big day room. So there was a day room, and then 4 big wings came off where the patients lived. And this guy's walking around talking to himself. I kind of crept up near him, and I was listening to his conversation. And it was like he was hearing voices, and it was like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You know, where you're listening to somebody talking, and they're responding to somebody. And it wasn't, you know, what do you call it, verbal cabbage or garbage, or you know, it was a coherent conversation. I mean, who or whatever he was talking to was talking back to him.
Yeah.
And then he saw me, and you know, I introduced myself, and I said, "You're new. I haven't seen you here before. What's your name?" And he looks me in the eye and he goes, "I'm Jesus Christ."
Right.
Oh, okay. I said, looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, you're not Jesus Christ, because I am." You know, and I'm waiting to see what that guy said 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I'm sitting there with like, okay, what's going to happen next?
Was that a protocol thing to say, or was it just was that the rebel in you just kind of?
Well, that was a rebel in me, kind of like, okay, well, here's my chance to check out what this guy said 15 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, because it's stuck in my head, and I'm sitting there, you know, kind of watching him, like, what's he going to do? You know, is he going to change his delusion like this guy said he would, or what's going to happen? So I'm like on pins and needles watching him. And he kind of thinks, and you know, he's kind of, and then he looks back up at me and he goes, "Okay, we can both be Jesus Christ." And he walks off. And I go, "Okay, what else did they lie to me about?"
Yeah.
And then there was another one, you know. So here's all these incidents where they just come out and say things, you know, and psych students don't have any recourse. It's not like engineering or mathematics or any of the hard sciences where you could actually go check things out. No, you're expected to believe what they say, and they don't want to be questioned. You know, if you question them too much, they don't like it. Especially you start getting up in the higher levels. When I was in the Ph.D. program, boy, they didn't like to be questioned at all. You asked too many questions there, and you were in trouble. So the second one, let me see, what was the second one?
So just on that, obviously the rebel in you asked that question. How would a normal kind of employee, if a patient had come out with that, they would just be told to just ignore it basically, or?
Yeah, they just go, he's crazy, you know, and that's kind of what they did. It's like they didn't ask questions. They didn't ask anything about the voices. You know, it's like, these guys are crazy. They're out of there. They're in a different world. There's no way that's just the way they are. It's a chemical imbalance, you know, which is a bunch of crap. Yeah. And I started watching that too. So, you know, when I first got there, I started asking the nurses and the psychiatrists and the other psychs there, you know, why are they acting? Because it was always self-destructive. It was always destructive. You know, they were always self-sabotaging. They were always hurting themselves. They were cutting themselves. They were attempting suicide. They were committing suicide. They were attacking other patients, and they were attacking psychiatrists at a rate that was unbelievable. I mean, and just psychiatrists, nobody else, not psychologists, not psych nurses. You know, they were attacking psychiatrists almost at the same rate they were attacking attendant staff that were there 24 hours a day.
You're talking physical attacks or verbal?
Physical attacks, which was one of the first things I noticed. You know, I was like, why are they attacking psychiatrists? Well, and the psychiatrist at the state hospital would only spend 15, 20 minutes a month with them. So I'm like thinking, what are they doing to piss these guys off in 20 minutes where they're getting slammed?
So would they attack, I don't know, like the cook or the cleaner, or in the same way? Was it just the psychiatrist?
No, they would periodically. I mean, whoever really. So you had to be careful because once they're pissed off, you don't know what they're going to do. But you know, they would leave most staff alone. But boy, they went after the psychiatrist, and I'm like, why was that? Why is that? And I even have the rate of that here somewhere.
Well, I actually read something interesting on your website. I've made a note of it, that I don't know whether you wrote this or that many psychiatrists felt drained with working with one schizophrenic, and there's actually suicides going on.
Oh yeah, the suicide rate. It's interesting. Schizophrenics have one of the highest suicide rates of any patient population. So you would think, okay, they're not very stable. But when you look at it, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is about equal.
That was my point. That was what I was trying to get to. Yeah, I found that astounding, because to me, obviously I work with these things as well. I obviously see how they can, you know, flip onto other people and infiltrate other people as well. So I found that interesting, but not altogether surprising.
Well, it took me by surprise. So in 1973, the Journal of American Medical Association reported the suicide rate for the general population was 11 out of 100,000. The suicide rate for schizophrenics, it's the leading cause of deaths for schizophrenics. 4 out of 10 will attempt suicide, according to the National Mental Health Institute, at some time. An estimated 4.9% of the people with schizophrenia die by suicide. Their suicide rate is 5 to 10 times that of the general population. The suicide rate for psychiatrists, according to the Journal of American Medical Association, is 65 per 100,000, or 5.9 times more than the general population.
Wow.
and about equal to that of the schizophrenic.
So how are they passing that off, these established authorities? I guess they're not really talking about it, right? That's what they normally do.
No.
Is people like you get that job?
Yeah, we get that job. So, and I wondered about that, and for years I had no answers. It was only 25 years later that I found out that it was the voices that don't like the medications that these guys are given. And basically what those antipsychotic drugs are major tranquilizers. So they calm these people down. Now what the voices want to do is to stir them up. And they want to generate as much negative emotional energy as they possibly can. And then that energy disappears. Now, I didn't find that out for years either. And you know, I thought at first that was due to the massive amount of anxiety that these voices cause. I mean, because they're awful. You know, they're constantly telling these people to kill themselves or hurt somebody else, or I mean, it's just the negative things they say are just endless.
Yeah.
Something whizzing around in there.
It's so weird. I kid you not. I don't know if you heard that, but there's like some kind of something's moving over there. There's no one else in here. It's like a diner. And it's quite interesting for people watching this. I was just saying to you off air, like the high, and I get this with sessions as well. Before sessions, these voices, let's call them, or entities, whatever, will, if I can't see someone for a week or two, they will really get into people and cause anxieties and fears. And then yesterday, as I was saying to you, I had just one thing after another go wrong, and the weird things that don't normally happen. And then they were drilling upstairs, and then there was noise out there, and then we couldn't connect before. It's actually really interesting to observe. But yeah.
Well, I know there's usually a lot of energy.
If you've got a warped personality anyway.
Well, yeah, there's always interference with these broadcasts. I mean, on this subject, there's always stuff that goes wrong. When I was talking to Freeman Fly, I mean, the electronics just went nuts. And the fellow managing those, he couldn't bring it under control for a good while. Finally, it passed. But there's always something.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so when you're with these people, so their answer is just to basically drug them. You know, if they're acting out, it's more drugs, basically.
Yes. Yeah, and all those drugs do is they treat the symptoms. You know, so they suppress the symptoms, but at the same time, they do a horrendous amount of physiological damage. They kill brain cells. They rot out the patient's peripheral nervous system. And at the state hospital, these long-term patients, they would just shuffle around. They were like zombies. Their nervous system was so burnt out, they couldn't even walk with a normal gait. These medicines do a lot of damage. Yeah. And you know, they will not consider any other form of treatment. And anybody in the medical profession who starts talking like we are is immediately condemned. Dr. Ermark, he's from Turkey. He was a professor in one of the big military academies in Turkey. And he watched a shaman cure several schizophrenics. So he wrote an article in a journal, and he published that. And he got attacked all up one side and down the other. Okay. So he wrote, what if schizophrenics really are possessed? And he got, what did this lady say? So basically he saw this. He said, this deserves to be investigated. Okay. Now this is a response that some highfalutin professor in England, it was, what was it? one of those big universities in England. I forgot which one it was. So she wrote, "This is a dumbfounding argument, and it's shocking to find it published in a post-medieval peer-reviewed journal. Lest anyone suspect me of being unfairly prejudiced against the possibility of demons, let me point out that even those who subscribe to demonic metaphysics could not be persuaded by Ermark's argument. His observation that there exist similarities between the clinical symptoms of schizophrenia and demon possession is no more surprising than the observation that there exist similarities between financial compensation for childhood tooth loss and visits by the tooth fairy. In each case, the latter is a hypothesis motivated by a desire to explain the former. If the uncanny similarity between schizophrenic and demonic possession is evidence that demonic possession is real, then the uncanny similarity between financial compensation and childhood tooth loss and visits by the tooth fairy is presumably evidence that the tooth fairy is real." And this lady goes on, and she's got no experience whatsoever, no clinical experience. She was like a philosophy professor or something like that. I wrote her back and I slammed her. I told her, you've never lived with a schizophrenic, you've never worked with one, I can see you've never had a conversation with one, you have absolutely no idea what the voices say to these patients, your closed-minded ivory tower colleagues never asked about it, you know nothing of the fixed predictable patterns run by these people, you know little or nothing about the effect the voice, and I just slammed her and said, you arrogant, egotistical fool. And waited for her to respond, and she never did. But this is the kind of response you get when you go, there are alternative therapies.
Yeah, it's all classed as woo-woo, I guess. They'll easily, put it down like that. But I wonder if these people come out because there's $14.6 billion made by pharmaceutical companies in antipsychotics. So
they have no investment in finding a cure. They make a lot more money suppressing the symptoms and then convincing the populace that there is no other treatment.
And it's the same with a lot of these other diseases, aren't they? It's all about the symptoms, treating the symptoms rather than getting to the root cause. Because if we get to the root cause, then suddenly big pharma's out of pocket, right?
Oh yeah, they changed. They were investing hardly any money in schizophrenic research because they haven't been able to find anything. They've been barking up the wrong tree with their chemical imbalance theory that's been proved completely fallacious. I mean, it's been proved wrong, and yet they continue to push that.
I was reading again on your website about that term, chemical imbalance. You know how they love their wordplay, don't they? It's almost like a watered down, it really just kind of softens the blow, doesn't it? When people are told that there's a chemical imbalance in their brain, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, we know what it is, but they don't even know what the chemical imbalance of the brain should be. There's a number of neurotransmitters in there. They have no idea what the chemical balance of the brain should be, or what this stuff does. For 10 years after antipsychotic drugs came out, they had no idea how it worked or why it worked. And they're fallacious bullcrap about we spend millions of dollars in research in these chemicals, and that's why we have to charge so much for these things. The antipsychotic drugs were discovered in a lab, a dye lab in France, by accident. And the employees working in that lab would see that they were, kind of getting groggy and lethargic. And finally, one of the chemical companies, Roche, somebody or other, extracted this, and they were using it for pain and surgery for a while. They were using it for other medical purposes, and then one of the doctors think, well, this might work with calming psychiatric patients. But at that time, it was the psychoanalysts who were in control over in Europe. And they say, no, that's a bunch of crap. So this guy took these chemicals to the U.S. and arranged to give them to psychotic patients in one of the psychiatric institutions here.
Mm.
And it worked marvelous.
Mm.
I mean, they just calmed down. They were able to kind of regain control again. They were able to drug these massive populations with these drugs and calm them down. They were looking for a way to control these guys more than anything else. Because what they'd done previous to that was, it went on and on and on.
So what did they do in the old days before the drugs were about? Because I watched the link that you sent me on that massive hospital that you worked at, and a lot of people went missing and stuff. Like family members are going back there and stuff. Do you have any idea what used to go on?
Oh, that started off back in ancient Egypt, where they were boring holes in the heads of schizophrenics, the priests were. But this all started back in 375 BC with Hippocrates, who came out and went, there is a physical cause for all illness. Okay? And then it snowballed from there. So that was the takeoff. He was the father of the medical profession. So from there on, it was like, oh yeah, there is a physical. That worked fine. I mean, medicine progressed astronomically. And then, back in the 1800s, Kraepelin, a psychiatrist, just announced out of thin air with no research, no backing, that yes, schizophrenia is also due to a physical cause. He had no backing for that. He had no research for that. But he announced it. So then they start looking for a physical cause, and finding a physical cause has failed ever since then. So
is there, sorry to interrupt there, but is there I don't know how much background you used to get from the patient, but in my work, I find that the more trauma a person has been through in childhood tends to lead to more heavier and more attachments. Was that a theme that you saw? I don't know how much you knew the history of the payment.
Yes, exactly.
Because
you look into their background, and usually the background's horrendous. So what these things do is they feed off of negative emotional energy. And that's where we're talking about the energetic drain. So for years, I believed that drained, because the schizophrenics would talk about it. I'd see it. They'd come into the office after being attacked by the voices all night, and they were just like dish rags. They didn't have any energy. But I thought it was because of the horrendous attacks. If you had these voices screaming in your head all the time and calling you names and telling you to kill yourself, I mean, that's pretty, So I figured that was why their energy was being drained. But then one day I was assigned to the jail for the prison in the complex I was in. I always got the nastiest assignments. So this was where the worst of the worst went. And, one day I walked into my office, and here's a memo from the captain of the central detention unit. So this is a jail for the prison. And he wanted me to come over there because there was a floridly psychotic inmate locked into a small cell with another inmate. And the psychotic guy would stand over him and just, he'd wake up at 3 in the morning. Here's this crazy guy just looking down at him, kind of spooky. And the guy was really out of it. Now, the other guy, I got a inmate letter from him saying he wanted out of that cell because he didn't want to be in there with that crazy guy staring down at him at 3 in the morning. He didn't know what he was going to do.
It's interesting at 3 o'clock in the morning as well, because there's if you research different paranormal things, they say between 3 and 4 is like the
That's exactly right. And that's when the voices hit the hardest too.
Wow.
Between 3 and 4 in the morning, and it's consistent.
Really?
Yes, really.
Wow.
So I did it. I went to the computer, pulled up the other guy, not the crazy guy, but the other guy's history. Now, what he had done, he snitched off a drug deal among the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the bigger gangs in the prison, and he was in big trouble. So he was there for protective custody. They already stabbed him once. And the security intercepted the drugs, took all the drugs, got all the gangsters involved, and sent them to prisons all over the state, broke up the entire thing. And boy, that gang was furious. They wanted that guy dead. You know, they wanted him dead so bad that they sent some guys got into trouble on purpose to get over there so they could get at him. That's how bad they wanted him dead. And they were into other cells. They were like shooting notes under his door. You come out of there, you're a dead man. You know, you couldn't be under more stress than that. Here you have a psychotic, a floored psychotic, unmedicated, you know, with a history of violence. You're locked into a small cell with him, and he's standing over you at 3 in the morning. You don't know what the hell is he going to do. And then you have these gangsters out there throwing notes on your door saying, you know, you're dead as soon as we get our hands on you. We're right here. We're waiting for you. We're waiting for the chance to get you. They already stabbed him once. So he's in there for protective custody. So I go over there and I pull up this guy first, the guy that the gangsters were after. And, you know, noticeably, he's anxious and upset. And I watch him as he comes up the steps. And he just flies up those steps and then walks quickly in the office. He's got plenty of energy. You know, he's depressed. Yeah, but he's not dragging. I mean, he's functioning well. He's talking. He's expressing himself well. And I'm like, okay. You know, he couldn't be under more stress than that. He's got plenty of energy. So after I was finished with him, let him go back, and then I called up his cellmate, the psychotic guy. He could barely make it up the steps. He looked like he had lead in his boots. He just had on the handrails, pulled himself up, and kind of meandered in the office, sat down in the chair, and he was just no energy whatsoever. And after talking to him, I mean, he could just barely speak. He was so drug out. After I got out of there, I went, that's not the cause. You know, anxiety is not the cause. So I'm like, and that was my theory for years. So I'm like, where am I going to go from there? So, you know, like, well, where's their energy going? And then previous to that, you know, I was working, what I always had in the prison was a group of prisoners who agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them as we were together in session. You know, if the voices were talking, I wanted to know about it. So the whole time I was there, I had this select group of inmates, and it was usually 10 or 12 of them, you know, because a lot of them don't want to talk about what their voices are saying, but these guys agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were saying. In turn, I agreed not to have them locked up or medicated or you know, get them in trouble with security as long as they weren't the imminent threat to themselves or anybody else. So it was like walking on the razor's edge. You know, I had to trust them and they had to trust me. You know,
was that protocol, or was that you just?
Oh no, no, that's not protocol. That is not protocol. We kept this very quiet.
Yeah. So you were really, you know, you were taking risks to find out.
I was taking risks. If one of those guys, you know, I remember one guy come in. He said the voices are telling me to stab this guard, and he disrespected me, you know, and they're, you know, and I'm like, listen, man, can you hold? You know, you know, if you can't keep it under control, I'm going to have to do something. You know, and so we talked a while, and he goes, yeah, I can take it, I can keep it under control. And I said, I'm going to watch you. You know, and I want you to check in with me every friggin' morning until I feel comfortable with you. And you know, so they had to trust me, I had to trust them. Because if I had locked that guy up, and his intent was not, I mean, and I determined his intent was not to actually harm that guard after I talked to him for a while. If he had, I'd have been, you know, and they found out about it, I'd have been fired. You know, why didn't you tell us? You know, on the other hand, if he said that, the voices are telling me to stab this guy, and I said, okay, I'm going to have you locked up. That's it. That group wouldn't say anything. It would get around, and I would get no information from them at all.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like walking the razor's edge. And there were several incidents where we were able to work it out that didn't happen because of that, because we trusted each other.
Yeah.
And if I found out I couldn't trust one of them, he was gone.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
So I've got to ask the next question is obvious. What kind of things were you getting from them? What feedback were you getting when you had disagreement with them?
Well, their voices didn't like me very much at all. So basically I would try different things to see what would interfere with the voices. And I noticed when I was working at the state hospital that the schizophrenics, when the preacher had an ice cream social in the main area there where the schizophrenics wouldn't go, and ice cream was hard to come by there, ice cream and cake, and they would stay on the dingy ward rather than go down there, and it was all of them. And I'd walk around. I saw that week after week. This happened month after month. And finally asked them, well, why are you staying up here when you could be down there having ice cream? And well, I don't like preachers. I don't like the Bible. I don't like, and finally some of them said, when I try to read the Bible, the voices get louder.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And I went, well, that's interesting. So, when I hear something like that, it registers. I don't accept it as truth right away. So I'd start asking some of the others.
Yeah.
So all the schizophrenics on my caseload, does this happen to you? So, yeah, it happened one after the other. The ones who tried to read the Bible, the voices got louder, and they would actually say, this is a bunch of crap. And one of them, I remember, one said that the voices told him Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to help you? And it was consistent.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they always had these dark books on their book stands at the hospital. It was like murder mysteries and war stories, and they were always nasty, dark books. So they were attracted to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was consistent too.
Yeah.
And then one day, one of them came up and we were talking, and he said, well, I repeat the 23rd Psalm when they come. And he said they react to that like a bunch of worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
Wow.
Yeah, so I remembered that. And when I got to the prison, I got the 23rd Psalm and started handing it out to these inmates I was working with. And I said, I'm going to give you this. When you hear the voices, you repeat it. And next week when you come in, tell me what happens. All of them. The voices went nuts. They hated it.
Really?
They hated it. They absolutely hated it. And they hated the Lord's Prayer.
Wow.
And they hated the song Amazing Grace.
Wow.
So
it's weird. I was having this conversation with my partner yesterday. We were watching a film. It's called, what's it called? I forget what it's called anyway, but it's about, possession and that stuff, because we're both Scorpios, so we like looking at the dark a lot. So, but again, in there were references to the Bible, and you hear of all these exorcisms and how they don't like and it's weird because I'm not religious at all. I believe in a universe, a creation, but they really don't like it, do they? I wonder what that is. I wonder what's true.
Well, you would think, why would a hallucination react like that? What if they were a hallucination? You wouldn't expect them to care about religion one way or the other. But
Maybe
it was
it's
consistent.
The energy of, I guess, I don't know, like the energy behind the message of love and peace, and
they don't want anything to do with that.
Maybe if you had another paragraph you wrote yourself, which was from you, which was along those lines, maybe they would hate that just as much as well. I just wonder.
Well, what I did do, I was always curious, so what I did is got some of these dark books they had, and I would get a paragraph out of that, and then I would take a paragraph about the same size out of the Bible, and I would tell them to read it, and then I'd take it back and I said, write down everything you remember about what you just read. And then I give them the dark one and say, okay, write down everything you remember about what you just read. They always remember like twice as much about the dark stuff than they did the Bible. Yeah, and it was consistent.
Unbelievable.
You know, so
Unbelievable.
why would a hallucination do that? Now the other thing was the voices were always negative, consistently, unswervingly negative. You know, they never said anything good about the patient or anybody else around the patient. It was always negative, derogatory. I have a listing of you know, just some of the stuff they say, and it just goes on and on and on. You know, like, no one will ever love you. You're a piece of garbage. You're wasted flesh. You're poor. You're going to stay poor. That's what you deserve. Neither you or your family or anybody cares about you. You're rotten. You don't deserve love. You can't do anything right. You have no talent. You're worthless. You know, positive people make them sick. You have no reason to feel good. You don't deserve respect. You're stupid. You're ugly. It just goes on and on. Every negative, derogatory thing you could think of.
Wow.
Now, why? You know, what I started wondering was, what? You know, hallucinations are random. You know, they're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're all over the place. You know, there's nothing holding them to any kind of form, or they're just all over the place. You know, what holds these voices on a consistently, unswervingly negative path? You know, something is confining them to the negativity.
Mm.
You know, and what is that? You know, if they were hallucinations, you wouldn't expect them to react against the Bible or that kind of stuff. You wouldn't expect them. You would expect them to be random. They're not.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect them to run these patterns like this.
Yeah.
Now, you think psychiatry looks at this? No. Oh, we were taught in school that they're hallucinations, so they must be hallucinations because we were told by the psychiatry professor they're hallucinations, and they're due to a chemical imbalance that doesn't exist, but they didn't tell us that in school. You know?
So you worked with a lot of people down the years, and did you find that you were the only one that was thinking, can't be right, there's got to be, were you kind of on your own path with this?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. You know, and it's weird because I hate puzzles, I hate math, you know, I hate figuring things out. But when it comes to this stuff, it was driving me crazy. You know, it was like I had to know what was going on. And that was the same way throughout my career. When somebody walked into the emergency room that was crazy, you know, I had to find out what it was and how it was working. And I remember the first time I saw somebody come in with, they were smoking, what is that crap? Bath salts or something like that.
I know what you mean, but I can't remember the word either.
Yeah, but it wasn't reacting like anything I ever saw before.
Yeah.
You know, and I was watching them and I'm going, well, they're not crazy. It's not meth. And I'm like, what is it? You know, what is this? And I finally found out it was that, you know, those bath salt things or something.
Yeah.
You know, this crazy drug that, you know, but.
Well, have you seen some of these drugs that are out now? I forget the terms, but like superhuman strength, these people, it's complete takeover as far as I'm concerned. You know, smashing into cars and, you know, like,
meth.
Meth and
amphetamine is one of the most dangerous drugs out there. I've seen more people go psychotic on amphetamine than any other drug.
Oh, really?
I mean, they go crazy and they stay there. And the way it, you know, they feel like, oh, superhuman and strong and bright and everything's working and they feel great. And you know, they come down and they're depressed for 2 or 3 days and they, you know, keep it up. And then they, you know, they start seeing shadow people. You know, these are 3-dimensional shadows. Usually they don't have any facial features. You know, they walk across the room, they come through walls. They're humanoid in shapes. What's weird is some of them have capes and hats and other stuff. And they're not just human shapes. Sometimes they're other kinds of animals or some weird stuff. and they just show up. They're darker than the rest of the room, and this is consistent. And I remember when meth started coming on the scene, I was working as a contractor for the prison. I'd already retired, and here they are talking. The prisoners are talking about shadow people. So I'm like, well, what are the shadow people? What are you talking about? Well, they're the tree people. They're humanoid, dark shapes, and they hide up in the trees. And if you watch them too long, they come down out of the trees and they come toward you. So, okay, I logged it in, and then prisoner after prisoner who was using meth, I'd ask them about the shadow people, and it was all consistent. They all were seeing the same thing: three-dimensional shadows with no facial features, no eyes, no nose. And then one day, one of them told me, yeah, I did see eyes. And so, well, what color were they? Lime green. That's weird. So I started asking them if they saw the eyes. And the eyes were either red or lime green. And what was weird was that the correlation between the patients who saw the eyes and the amount of trouble they were in with the amphetamine was consistent. The more addicted they were to the stuff, the more they saw the eyes. So I actually use that as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
And they all said, if you start paying attention to these shadow people, they start coming toward you.
Right.
And that was usually enough to scare them off. And then one day I ran into a prisoner who said, well, I ran an experiment with them because we wanted to see if my friend, who was also a meth addict, whether we were seeing the same shadow person. So what they did is they were injecting meth. They went out to one of the Indian reservations in the middle of nowhere, and in their truck, they stopped, and one guy injected the meth and waited, and then he started seeing the shadow people. So he'd ask the other guy who was straight at the time, well, there's one over there by the tree. You see him? What's he doing? You see what he's doing? He goes, well, no, I don't see anybody. How about that one over there? You see him? No, I don't see him. You see that one over there standing right next to you? No, I don't see him. So he injected, the second guy injected, and then he started seeing him too. So then they're going, do you see that one over there by the bush? Yeah, I see him. What's he doing? Well, he's looking at us. He's coming kind of in our direction. What about the over there, that tree? What do you see over there? Well, I see two of them over there. So they were seeing the same things.
Yeah.
It was consistent. They were both seeing these things. And as they're doing this, these things are coming out of the desert by scores. And then they were completely surrounding these two guys who were fascinated with, watching them. And then these guys are like, holy shit, we're surrounded. They jumped in the truck and they locked the door. And they're watching these things from inside the truck, like feeling safe. And then the guy said something that kind of really got my attention. He said, the whole truck was surrounded. He said, then all of a sudden, the back of the truck went down like a ton boulder had hit the bed of the truck, and the front jerked up. And he said they looked back there and the whole bed was full of these shadow people.
Oh my God.
But what weirded me out was I thought they were like ghosts or, phantoms or something. I wasn't quite sure. I still don't know exactly what they are. They hardly ever speak. And I've only spoken to one or two people who heard them speak, and that was freaky, really freaky. But the back of the truck went down, and they actually impacted physical reality.
Wow.
So I'm like, whoa, wait, that's a whole different story there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, what did you do after you saw him on the back of the truck? He said, we put that truck in gear, and we almost smashed it getting out of there. Yeah. And I asked him, well, did they follow you? And he said, no.
Wow. Fascinating.
But that was I didn't know they could impact physical reality. Earlier, while I was working with some of these inmates I was working with personally, there was one that was getting better and better and better. And there were several of them, as we discovered more ways to interfere, like the 23rd Psalm, and there were several other things that would interfere with them. And we try these things out, and as I developed different ways to interfere with them, they were getting pissed. So here's these guys in this little group coming in saying the voices are really getting pissed with you. They're really getting pissed off at you. Yeah. And I'm like, well, tell them to go jump in the lake, soak their heads.
That's
And
fascinating.
then
Jerry,
you
I
want
think we're gonna leave. I want to go into this in the second hour, if it's okay.
to,
So we're
okay.
gonna do a part 2 of this. We're gonna get into what pissed them off, which is we'll start the next section with
What they did when they were pissed off.
yeah, what they did when they pissed off. So we'll end this here, guys. Once again, if you're only watching this one, then please don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, comments below if you've got any questions about this, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.